What's up, guys? Today we're taking a look at this story. Did you know the FCC just banned all new Wi-Fi routers that aren't made in the USA? So all foreign-made routers are now banned in the USA, at least the new ones. Does this mean you're going to have to throw out your router? Well, the good news is you can keep your current router, but you might have some problems buying a new router, especially considering there's really not much being made in the USA. So I guess they're going to have to come up with a plan, but I have no doubt that if we follow the money, we will find some special interest somewhere. Most likely, that's my opinion. So the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, basically made it illegal to sell consumer-grade routers. So these are like home routers. And as long as they're not made in the US, they're banned. And if they're made in the US, which really there aren't much, I know there's something like Starlink has a router made in the US, a consumer router, but, I guess Elon's going to make out on that one if there's no other routers to be made. Now, I did read about some other options that may be made in the USA. But as it mentions here, it's not clear that any consumer routers are currently made in the US, but apparently Starlink router is made in Texas, at least in part. So that is likely to not have been affected by this. And this comes back to actual Salt Typhoon and other stories. In fact, I've got a couple articles up here to share with you that are very pertinent to this. So we're going to take a look at those real quick. I'm not going to make this a really long video. I'm just going to go through it. So they're saying that the reason for this is because of things like Salt Typhoon, which is a huge deal. I mean, Salt Typhoon, which was allegedly linked to China, basically compromised the U.S. telecom system. And in that way, it's to a point where some articles are even saying that they are not sure when or if they're going to get rid of some of these attackers. And we're going to go into some of the backdoors today as well, so make sure to stick around, make sure to like the video, make sure to follow the channel so you don't miss anything, share the video wherever you want, download it, re-upload it, I don't care. However you want to share it is good with me. Let's take a look at some stories that led up to this. So thousands of ASUS routers were being hit with stealthy, persistent backdoors. We're going to take a look at this. This actually breaks down some good information. We're also taking a look at CISA as well, based on some of the router backdoor problems. Now, I also did a video some years ago, I'm going to see if I can find it, where I actually found multiple of the same identical backdoors in multiple major brand routers. Identical backdoors. I mean, identical access. Identical in many ways. And we're going to explore some of that today as well. I can't track down that video or that article at the moment, but we will take a look at something similar. Now, this is not surprising at all. I mean, we know that if you buy something on eBay, if you buy something on Amazon, there's always a chance of a backdoor in it, and that's a big reason that people are focused on things like OpenWRT, open source firmware for your router. That's a great option if you're worried about the potential for a backdoor in your router. I mean, think about it. Your router is what essentially controls all the packets in your network. So if your backdoored router is controlled by a foreign party, of course, that basically opens your entire network to manipulation. Now, of course, with things like encryption, things like that, you can still defeat some of the problems there, but there's a lot of other actions. Some of these hidden backdoors actually have ways to discover other ones. So here's the Jetstream and Wavelength routers, which, interestingly enough, they seem to be linked. And here is the user interface to run system commands as root. And what they found in this particular one is they actually found that these two companies are basically owned and run by the same people. And in this particular router backdoor, it even showed how it had different scripts to scan for other Wi-Fi networks with the ability to connect to other Wi-Fi networks. So your compromised router could lead to the compromise of nearby networks as well. Now, do I trust this router ban? You might be wondering that. No, I don't. I absolutely do not trust it, especially considering all of the recent events, I'll say, that make me a little suspicious about the blanket ban, in that nobody is allowed to own a new foreign router. Even if something, you're able to put open source firmware on it, apparently the new hardware is going to be banned. For those in the US, it does feel like we are getting increasingly isolated in the US in a way, in my personal take on it at least, is that so many things are happening. Think about the RAM and memory prices. Then I also covered how Bezos was saying that he hopes that in the future we'll be willing to rent remote cloud computers to be our new computer and basically give up personal computer ownership. So here's just some of the scripts and action here, just showing some nearby networks that was found by this backdoored router. And then you can also see some botnet risk, which is huge with routers. So there is legitimate concern for security, cybersecurity, even potentially national security, but really that kind of thing usually is restricted to government workers, things like that aren't allowed. It's not normal, or at least it's not common, to see regular civilians having the technology they're allowed to access, especially with worldwide trade, completely restricted and cut off from the world in the router world. That is wild. But I do know that, there's a push to try and bring manufacturing to the US. I'm just trying to guess why this has happened. Now, of course, Salt Typhoon, other attacks, there are legitimate concerns. So as it mentions down here, they found links between Wavelength and Windstar routers. And these are supposed to be two separate companies, but what they found was a lot of similarities here. Now, when you looked into it, you could find the address was similar here. In fact, the same address. So, interesting. Or very, very, Block 4, Tai Song Industrial Park. Yeah, looks the same to me. So, two different router companies that apparently have the same problems, and they even have the same user interface, very similar, as you can see right here, Wavelength, Jetstream. Let's go to the next article, though. So what does it mean for you? Now, what it means is that it's going to apply to the importation and sale rather than the use of new foreign-made routers. Oh, okay. It's important to stress that it applies to the importation and sale rather than the use of new foreign-made routers. So, yes, as mentioned, you can continue to use your existing router, but you may be forced to deal with whatever company, whatever potentially centralized entity will be manufacturing routers in the future. And I'll tell you, my concern there is the potential for backdoors manufactured here. I mean, there is no reason that if you force the entire population to use the same routers, that provides perfect potential for coordination of backdoors. As I mentioned, and this is just hypothetical stuff I'm talking about now. As I mentioned, I found it was about 3 or 4 major brands that all had the same identical backdoors in various different articles, and I'll try and bring those up if I can find them. I'm not going to do that during this video because I don't want to waste your time, but you can keep your current router. Now, interestingly enough, they also banned drones, foreign drones. So, like I was saying, a lot of this seems to be pushing towards trying to bring manufacturing to the US, because if you're banning everyone from owning foreign drones, of course, well, you're going to need to have some US drones. Now, they claim that drones are basically surveillance and intelligence collection equipment, which they definitely are, and can also carry different types of payloads and could be used for paramilitary purposes, which is very true. That's valid. That's very true. So we saw this just a couple months ago. So what I'm asking you today is, are we seeing basically a isolation of those in the US further and further in technology sectors, like where it seems like, people in the US, how free really are you if you don't have the option to buy affordable drones? Now, of course, the national security stuff, sure, you can bring that up. And the compromise of, Salt Typhoon and things like that. Yeah, there's a big problem there. But interestingly enough, it looks like that same family is investing in drone production in the US. So works out well when you ban foreign drones, and then you're also investing in drone companies. Now, granted, at this time, it looks like it's going to be basically military-type drones, at least according to this. At least at this time, I would not be the least bit surprised after banning foreign drones if this also happened to turn into not only military, but civilian drone company. Interesting, huh? How that works. Now, let's take a look at this hidden router firmware article from CISA here. So this is a good article here, and it goes into some of the organizations and groups that are involved in putting malicious backdoored firmware onto routers. And so this is pretty interesting, I thought. And I'll leave a link to this in the blog post, so if you're interested, you can check it out there. And basically what these organizations did, like black tech actors, they basically even went after Cisco, a US-based company that sold routers, and they would basically modify the firmware to hide their activity, to be able to gain access to the entire network. And the way they were able to do that was they would actually roll back the firmware version to an older version, then they would modify that. Here details the firmware replacement process. And they've targeted various different brands of router devices. It allowed the actors to conceal configuration changes, hide commands, disable the logging. So you may think you'll be able to detect these kinds of things, but if your router is compromised, that router can also hide from you all of that stuff. So if you're just sniffing even on the router itself, if it's using compromised firmware, you're not going to see anything it doesn't want you to see because it's running compromised firmware, backdoored firmware, with remote access as well, even things as simple as netcat shells and SSH backdoors as well. As it mentions here, the malicious firmware is used to establish the persistent backdoor access. And what that means is, once your router is compromised, it has access to every device in your home, and it also has wireless chips, which it can use to contact nearby devices as well. Anything that is in range for that router could also be attacked by other types of exploitation, and potentially if they had other types of IoT products, which I'm also going to bring up another hypothetical, if there were other actors that were making IoT devices working with these black tech actors, they could have your refrigerator, for instance, compromised. They could have other devices in your home that use wireless compromised. And they could do all this from a compromised router. So there is validity to the risk, but the question is, what the hell is made in the US? What the hell is made in the US? So here's what they did. They would use old legitimate firmware, and then they would modify in memory to allow the installation of their modified firmware, so kind of roll back some of that security to allow it to replace it. So they modified the firmware in memory called hot patching that allowed them to install the modified bootloader, and this is on Cisco devices. And it goes and shows you how it downloads the old legitimate firmware here. Then it downloads the modified bootloader and modified firmware, and then it loads that modified bootloader, which ends up basically concealing everything they want to conceal from you. And they enable access by sending a trigger packet that has specific values of the UDP data or TCP sequence number fields. So this is stuff that's just like not stuff that most people would pick up on, like just things that are patterns that may not be picked up by anyone really unless they know what they're looking for. It's easier to conceal using embedding inside, packet sequences, things like that. And this is how they loaded it into these Cisco routers. And it rehashes here about how they first installed the old legitimate firmware and then modified. Don't want to rehash the same thing over and over. So my question to you is this. Since we're seeing restrictions on memory by price, we're seeing the aims of AI companies to get us to rent our future computers. Remember, you will own nothing and you will be happy by 2030. Sounds like it's almost coming true, right? Well, the tariffs have caused the prices on memory, on SSD storage, basically your self-hosting ability. That is your self-hosting ability. Why is it affecting so much? Yes, we know AI demand is there, but this is affecting memory types of previous generations as well. There's been a major cost increase for people. I've noticed some things tripled, sometimes quadrupled in price. The same exact item, the same exact website, the same exact supplier. Things are skyrocketing, and I think it's only going to get worse. And of course, that's going to, as I've been talking about for years, steer innovation towards a thin client future. And one of those, basically a dumb terminal for you to remotely control your cloud instance so that your data collection can be optimized. At least that's what goes on through my head. But now, here's what it makes me think of. And I'd like to ask you, do you think we're going to see further restrictions of IoT devices? Now, when I say IoT devices, I'm not just saying your refrigerator. I'm not just saying your toaster with Wi-Fi. I'm asking you, given the real priority on things such as Flock Safety, who had a partnership with Ring Doorbell, do you think there might even be, knowing that we know there are foreign-made doorbells with Wi-Fi access that could also potentially compromise other devices, do you think we're going to see restrictions on foreign-made doorbell cameras? That would be a scary thought, and it would gain a massive amount of power to companies like Ring. Sure would help unroll that dragnet, wouldn't it? Hey, that's just my random thoughts, though. What do you think? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. So, are you concerned about this? Are you going to take any kind of action? Maybe we'll make our own router sometime on this channel. Maybe we'll do something like that considering this ban. I don't know. We'll see. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are in the comments, and how do you see this playing out? Do you think we're going to see further restrictions of technology, foreign-made technology, for those who live in the U.S., land of the free? Do you think that is a possibility, considering we just saw the drones become banned, and now we see some investments there, and we know people love to make money, and we know they banned routers now, and we know the memory prices are out of control, leading to the future of that thin client future and that minimized hardware or that overpriced hardware. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. Make sure to like and share the video, and I'll see you guys soon in another video on how to protect your security and privacy.